I arrived late to dinner with our friends and walked up to the table without my wife noticing. She was saying, "I'm divorcing him. He's too much a loser for me." Everyone laughed as I slipped off my wedding ring, but the smiles vanished when I revealed one detail. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments what city you're watching us from. I arrived 20 minutes late to the restaurant. The traffic had been hellish, and I was thinking about apologizing to Melissa for the delay. I walked between the tables looking for the group. I'd seen them from afar, our usual friends, laughing loudly, drinks in hand. I approached from behind without anyone noticing me, and then I heard her. My wife's voice, clear, strong, full of contempt. "I'm going to divorce him. He's too much of a failure for me. I can't stand living with someone who has no ambition, who generates nothing, who simply exists." The laughter erupted. Camillo almost choked on his wine. Karina covered her mouth, pretending to be surprised, but her eyes shone with morbid curiosity. And Melissa kept talking, enjoying every word. "Honestly, I've already wasted too much time. I deserve something better. Someone better." My hand moved on its own towards my wedding ring. I felt it cold, heavy, 22 years wearing it. 22 years believing it meant something. I slid it off my finger while everyone kept laughing. Nobody had seen me yet. I held the ring between my fingers, looking at it in the dim light of the restaurant, and in that moment something inside me broke. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. A cold, crystalline clarity that cut like glass. I took a step forward, another. The silence began to spread when Camillo saw me first. His smile froze, then Karina's. Her eyes widened. Melissa was still with her back to me, unaware, finishing her monologue. The worst part is he doesn't even realize how pathetic he is. I stopped right behind her. The laughter had completely died. Only a heavy, uncomfortable silence remained, pressing against the walls. I dropped the wedding ring on the table in front of her. The small metallic sound echoed like a gunshot. Melissa turned her head slowly. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in years I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. "My name is Evaristo. I'm 62 years old. For more than 2 decades, I built an industrial components company from scratch. It wasn't glamorous, wasn't in magazines, but it worked. It generated a steady income, employed 40 people, and allowed me to live with dignity. I met Melissa when I was 40. She was 32. She was magnetic. She knew how to enter a room and become the center of attention. I was the complete opposite, quiet, methodical, not very social. I guess that's why she fascinated me so much. She brought light to spaces I didn't know were dark. We got married 8 months after we met. My mother, Dolores, warned me, "Evaristo, that woman doesn't look at you. She looks at what you have." I ignored it. I thought it was jealousy. I thought she was the typical protective mother-in-law. I thought she was wrong. She wasn't. The first years were good, or at least I thought so. Melissa took care of the house, organized dinners, managed appearances. I worked long hours. She said she didn't mind. She said she understood. She said she supported me, but little by little things began to change. She started making small, almost imperceptible comments. "Don't you think you should dress better for these meetings?" People ask, "Why don't we have a bigger house?" "Camillo just bought a new car. When are we going to change ours?" At first I tried to please her. We bought a bigger house, changed the cars, hired domestic staff, but it was never enough, never. And I kept working, believing that if I tried harder, if I earned more, if I gave her more, she'd finally be satisfied. How naive I was. At some point, I stopped noticing when she started treating me like a provider instead of a husband. She talked about my house instead of our house. She bought things without consulting me and justified them by saying I was never available to give an opinion. Her friends became my jury. Every dinner was an evaluation, every social gathering, a test I didn't know I was taking, and I always failed. Evaristo doesn't understand fashion. Evaristo doesn't know how to socialize. Evaristo is too boring for these things. She'd say it in front of me as if I wasn't there, as if I were a piece of furniture. And I stayed quiet because I thought that's how you kept the peace, because I believed that's what good husbands did. Endure, put up with it, provide. But that night, in that restaurant, Looking at her pale face as she held my ring in her hand, something changed. It wasn't explosive. I didn't shout. I didn't make a scene. I just looked her in the eyes and said, with a calmness I didn't even know I had, a failure. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The others at the table looked at their plates, their glasses, anything but us. Nobody dared to breathe too loudly. I let the ring roll slightly on the tablecloth, stopping in front of her wine glass. Interesting choice of words, Melissa. My voice didn't tremble. There was no anger in it, just a firmness that came from some deep place that had been dormant for years. Because I have something to tell you, something I think everyone here should hear too. I sat in the empty chair they'd left for me calmly, without rushing, as if nothing extraordinary were happening. Melissa looked at me with a mix of confusion and alarm. Camillo had stopped smiling completely. Karina fidgeted nervously with her napkin. I picked up the wine list, opened it, closed it. An absurd, unnecessary gesture, but one that stretched the silence in a delicious way. Do you remember 3 years ago, Melissa? When my company started having problems. She blinked. Of course she remembered. It had been her favorite topic for months, the crisis in the industrial sector. The drop in contracts, the clients who left. She used it as ammunition in every argument, as proof of my incompetence. You said I'd ruined everything, that I was no good at business, that a real man would have saved the company. My voice remained calm, almost conversational. Do you remember? Melissa didn't answer. Her hand trembled slightly on the table. You suggested we sell everything, the house, the cars, that we liquidate the company's assets before they were worth nothing. Do you remember that too? Now she nodded, a barely perceptible movement, and I agreed. We signed papers, lots of papers. You were so eager to get rid of everything that you didn't even read them properly, did you? The color had drained from her face. What did you do? She whispered. I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. I did exactly what you asked. I transferred everything. The company, the properties, the investments, everything. Her breathing quickened. To whom? To whom did you transfer it? I leaned forward, holding her gaze, to me, to my personal name, because everything you signed that day were documents removing you as co-owner of absolutely everything. The silence that followed was beautiful. Camillo had dropped his fork. Karina's mouth was open. Melissa had stood up, staggering slightly. That's illegal. It can't be legal. Oh, it's completely legal. My lawyer Enrique made sure of it. Every paper checked 3 times, every signature authenticated. You voluntarily waived all your rights to the marital assets because you said it was all worthless, because you said it was all lost. My smile widened just a bit. I said the company was in crisis, and it was, but I never said it was going to stay that way. I leaned back in my chair, enjoying every second. You know what's fascinating about industrial crises? They're cyclical. And if you have patience, if you know how to wait, if you truly understand the business, you can come out the other side much stronger. Melissa was shaking her head again and again. No, this isn't happening. 6 months ago, I got a contract with an automotive firm, $300,000 annually. 3 months ago, another with a construction company, $500,000. And 2 weeks ago, I closed a deal with an international consortium, $2 million for 3 years. The words fell like stones in still water. Each figure was a blow, each revelation a stab. The company you thought was dead is now worth approximately $5 million, and it's growing every month, every week. Camillo had turned so pale he looked sick. Karina looked at Melissa with something that dangerously resembled contempt. But best of all, Melissa, what makes this night so special is that you gave up all of that when you signed those papers. You thought you were escaping a sinking ship. In reality, you were handing me the keys to an empire. She started to cry. Tears of rage, of humiliation, of absolute panic. You're a monster. You tricked me. You manipulated me. I looked at her without a shred of sympathy. No, Melissa, I gave you exactly what you asked for. You wanted to get rid of the burden. You wanted your freedom, and you got it, along with absolutely nothing else. She looked to her friends for support. She looked at Camillo, who suddenly found his wine glass fascinating. She looked at Karina, who was checking her phone as if she'd just received an urgent message. No one defended her. No one said anything because everyone at that table knew the truth. They knew how she treated me. They knew the humiliations, the insults, the mockery. Except when I was a failure, it was fun. It was entertainment. Now that the tables had turned, suddenly nobody wanted to be on her side. The house you live in is in my name. The car you drive is in my name. The bank account you use is in my name. Every credit card, every club membership, everything you touch is mine. I stood up slowly, leaving some bills on the table to cover my share of the dinner I would never eat. And tomorrow morning my lawyer will be waiting for you at his office with the divorce papers. You can keep your clothes, your personal jewelry, and nothing else. Melissa tried to grab my arm. Evaristo, wait, can we talk? It was a mistake. I didn't mean to. What was a mistake? I interrupted her with an icy voice. Calling me a failure, making fun of me in front of our friends, or that I heard you. Her fingers tightened on my sleeve desperately. Please, 23 years together. That has to mean something. I looked into her eyes. Those same eyes that once seemed beautiful to me. Now I only saw calculation, panic, and the desperation of someone who has just realized they've lost everything. You're right. 23 years means something. They mean 23 years of lessons learned. And the most important one was this: never trust someone who only loves you for what you have. I pulled away from her grasp, easily. She was strong with words, but weak in everything else. Enjoy your dinner, Melissa. It's the last thing I'm paying for. And I walked away. I walked between the tables, left the restaurant, and breathed the cold night air. For the first time in years, I felt free. I drove that night with no destination. The streets were empty. The city lights flickered around me like silent witnesses to what had just happened. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel revenge. I just felt a strange emptiness, as if I'd just removed a weight I'd carried for so long I couldn't remember what it was like to walk without it. My phone started vibrating, a call, then another. Messages started piling up. All from Melissa. We need to talk. This is ridiculous. You can't do this to me. Call me, please. Evaristo, answer. I ignored them all. Each vibration was like an echo of all the years my own needs were ignored, my own words interrupted, my own feelings minimized. Now it was my turn not to answer, and it felt strangely liberating. I arrived at a small hotel on the outskirts. Nothing fancy. A simple room with a clean bed and windows overlooking the highway. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed the full weight of the night to fall on me. When had all this really started? When had I stopped being a husband to become a walking ATM? I closed my eyes and forced myself to remember. Not the edited version I'd been telling myself for years. The truth, the raw and painful truth I'd been avoiding because it was easier to pretend everything was fine. Melissa never loved me. Maybe at the beginning she felt something. Attraction, maybe curiosity, but love, real love, the kind built on small things, on late-night conversations, on mutual support during difficult days. That never existed. What existed was a transaction. I provided stability, financial security, a comfortable lifestyle. She provided image, social status, the illusion of a successful marriage. And for years, I accepted those terms without question because I thought it was the most a man like me could aspire to. A quiet man, an uninteresting man, a man who built businesses instead of relationships. But there were signs, so many signs I ignored, like that time 5 years ago when my mother got sick. She was hospitalized for 2 weeks. I went every day after work. I spent hours by her bedside talking to her, even though she could barely respond. Melissa went only once for 30 minutes. She complained that the hospital smelled bad, that the chairs were uncomfortable, that she didn't understand why I insisted on being there so long. Your mother is old, Evaristo. It's natural for her to get sick. You can't stop time. She said it with an indifference that chilled my blood, but I justified it. I told myself she wasn't close to her own family, that she didn't understand the bonds I had with Dolores. I told myself everyone processes things differently. I told myself anything not to face the truth, that the woman I'd married lacked basic empathy. Or that time, when we lost an important contract, a client I'd worked with for 8 years decided to go with the competition. It was a tough blow, not just financially, but personally. I'd invested time, effort, trust in that business relationship. I came home devastated. I needed to talk. I needed someone to listen, to tell me everything would be okay, that it was just a temporary setback. Melissa was in the living room with 3 of her friends. They were planning a trip to a spa. When I tried to talk to her, she looked at me with annoyance. Evaristo, we're busy. It can wait. I told her it was important. I insisted I only needed 5 minutes. She sighed, took me to the kitchen, and while I explained what had happened, she checked her phone. She didn't look up once. When I finished speaking, she just said, "Well, I guess you'll have to get another client then." And she went back to her friends. I was left alone in that kitchen, feeling like I just opened my chest and shown a wound, only for someone to look at it and say it was no big deal. That night, I slept in my office, not because I was angry, but because I didn't want to be in a house where my pain didn't matter. But even then, I didn't leave. I didn't make drastic decisions. I stayed because that's what good husbands did. They stayed, they endured, they waited for things to magically get better without doing anything about it. The breaking point began 3 years ago. The crisis in the sector was real. Contracts started getting canceled. Clients stopped answering calls. The red numbers multiplied every month. I worked 16 hours a day trying to save what I'd built. I'd come home exhausted, my mind still processing numbers, strategies, solutions. And Melissa was there waiting for me, not with concern or support, but with recriminations. I knew this would happen. I always knew you weren't smart enough to keep a business afloat. All our friends have successful husbands, and what do I have, a loser? You should sell everything before it's worthless. At least we'd recover something. Every word was a blow. Every comment, a reminder that to her, I wasn't a person with feelings, with fears, with a legitimate crisis. I was an investment that had stopped yielding returns. One night, after a particularly brutal argument, I sat in my office and cried. A 60-year-old man crying alone in the dark. Not for the business, but because I realized I'd spent more than 2 decades with someone who despised me and that I'd allowed that contempt because I didn't believe I deserved better. That's when I called Enrique, my lawyer, but more importantly, my friend. I told him everything, without filters, without justifications, the whole pathetic truth. I expected judgment. I expected him to tell me it was my fault for being so blind. Instead, he listened in silence for almost an hour, and when I finished, he just said, "We're going to fix this, but you need to trust me completely." Enrique wasn't just my lawyer. He was someone who knew me before Melissa. We'd studied together, shared a tiny office when we were both starting our careers, celebrated each other's successes, and consoled each other's defeats. He'd been at my wedding. He'd witnessed how Melissa slowly turned me into a shadow of who I was, and he'd waited, with infinite patience, for me to finally open my eyes. "Evaristo, what I'm about to propose isn't revenge," he told me that night at his office with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold between his hands. "It's protection. It's ensuring that when all this is over, you're not left destroyed." He explained the plan. It was simple but brilliant. Melissa wanted me to liquidate everything because she believed the company was dead, that the assets were worthless, that it was better to cut our losses before we sank further. What she didn't know, because she never bothered to understand my work, was that I've been laying the groundwork for a recovery. There were contacts on standby, there were contracts under negotiation, there were opportunities that just needed time to mature. "If she wants out, let her out," Enrique said. "But make sure that when she leaves, she takes exactly what she thinks she's leaving behind." Nothing. He was meticulous. Every document reviewed by 3 different lawyers. Every clause drafted to be absolutely legal, absolutely clear, and absolutely final. Melissa would waive all her rights to the marital assets. On paper, it looked like I was giving in to her pressure, liquidating and reorganizing to save what little was left. In reality, I was building a legal wall that would leave her out when things got better. "Won't she notice?" I asked, genuinely worried something would go wrong. Enrique smiled sadly. "Evaristo, she never reads what she signs. You know that. She trusts that her name and her marriage to you are enough to protect her. She doesn't understand that paper always beats assumptions." He was right. Melissa signed everything without reading more than the headings. She was too eager to get rid of what she considered a burden, too confident that she could always manipulate me to get what she wanted anyway. I presented the documents to her one afternoon in our living room. "These are the reorganization papers," I told her, "to transfer assets and protect us from creditors." She barely looked at them. "Where do I sign?" I pointed to the lines. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each signature was a nail in her own financial coffin, and she made them with a smile, believing she was escaping a disaster. When she finished, she stood up, gave me a condescending pat on the shoulder, and said, "At least you did something right. Now we can move on without this burden." Move on, as if the business I'd built with my own hands, with years of work and sacrifice, was just a nuisance, a stone in my shoe, something disposable. I put the documents in Enrique's briefcase, who had witnessed everything from the doorway. We looked at each other. We didn't need to say anything. We both knew something irreversible had just happened. And then I started working harder than I'd ever worked in my life, not just to save the company, but to prove to myself that I wasn't the failure Melissa said I was. I reactivated contacts I'd neglected. I traveled to meetings in other cities, sometimes sleeping in cheap hotels to save money. I submitted proposals, made adjustments, negotiated terms, and slowly, very slowly, things began to change. The first contract came 4 months after Melissa signed the papers. An automotive company needed specialized components. $300,000 annually. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a start. It was oxygen, it was hope. I didn't say anything to Melissa. I kept acting as if all was lost. I kept coming home with a defeated look on my face. I kept letting her treat me like I was useless. Because every insult, every cruel comment, every look of contempt only fueled my determination. The second contract came 2 months later. A construction company expanding its operations. $500,000. This time I couldn't completely hide my satisfaction. I came home, and Melissa noticed something different about me. "Why are you in a good mood?" she asked suspiciously. "Just a good day," I replied vaguely. She narrowed her eyes, but didn't press. She probably thought I'd finally resigned myself to my failure, that I'd accepted my place as the mediocre husband she deserved to put up with. How wrong she was. The following months were a roller coaster. There were good days and terrible days. There were moments when I thought maybe I was destined to fail, that maybe Melissa was right about me. But then I'd remember that night in my office. I'd remember the tears I'd shed. I'd remember the decision I'd made not to let anyone else define my worth. And I kept going. Dolores, my mother, was my anchor during that time. She'd never trusted Melissa, and when I finally told her what was happening, what I'd planned, she simply nodded. "That woman was never worthy of you, son. I'm glad you finally see it." Her words gave me strength in the darkest moments. Because if my own mother, who had raised me alone after my father abandoned us, who had worked 2 jobs to give me an education, believed in me, then maybe I was worth something, maybe I did deserve respect, maybe I wasn't the failure Melissa repeated I was. The third contract was the definitive one. An international consortium was looking for a reliable supplier for a 3-year project. High-precision industrial components, strict specifications, tight deadlines. It was exactly the kind of challenge my company could handle. I prepared the proposal for weeks, reviewed every detail, consulted with engineers, adjusted prices, and when I finally submitted the document, I knew it was solid. The wait was agonizing, 2 weeks with no response, then 3. I started to lose hope. Maybe I'd aimed too high. Maybe I wasn't ready for a project of that magnitude. And then I got the call. "Mr. Evaristo, we're pleased to inform you that your proposal has been accepted. $2 million for 3 years with an option to renew." I had to sit down. My legs stopped working. $2 million in a single contract, more than I'd earned in the last 5 years combined. "Sir, are you still there?" "Yes," I managed to say. "Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Thank you so much." I hung up the phone and stared at my office wall. I didn't cry. I didn't shout for joy. I just stood there, feeling years of humiliation, of doubt, of pain begin to crumble. I wasn't a failure. I never had been. I'd just been married to someone who needed to believe I was one to feel superior. I called Enrique. I got the contract. There was a pause. Then his voice, filled with restrained emotion. I knew you would. I always knew you would. What's next? I asked. Now we wait, he replied. Because if Melissa is planning what I think she's planning, she'll make her move soon, and when she does, we'll be ready. I didn't have to wait long. 2 weeks later, Melissa started acting strange, sweeter than usual, more attentive. She'd ask about my day, something she hadn't done in years. She made me coffee in the mornings. She smiled when I entered a room. At first I thought maybe she'd had a genuine change of heart, that maybe she'd realize how she'd treated me. How naive. One night, while we were having dinner, she dropped the bomb. Evaristo, I've been thinking. Maybe we should separate. She said it so casually, like someone commenting on the weather. Separate, I repeated, feigning surprise. Yes, not in a bad way. I just think we've grown in different directions. You have your work, I have my interests. Maybe it's time to be honest about what we want. I took a sip of water, giving myself time to process. This was exactly what Enrique had predicted. Melissa believed the company was worth zero. She believed that by divorcing me, she'd be free of any potential debt. She didn't know that what she was really doing was giving up millions. If that's what you want, I finally said in a neutral voice. She seemed relieved. She probably expected a fight, pleading drama. I'm glad you're taking it this way. We can do this in a civilized manner. Civilized. That word coming from her was almost comical. But I nodded, finished my dinner, and that night I slept better than I had in years because I knew the end was near and that when it came, it would be glorious. The next few days were surreal. Melissa acted like she'd just had a weight lifted off her shoulders. She smiled more, went out with her friends more. She spoke on the phone in a low voice, but loud enough for me to hear snippets. Yes, I'm finally going to do it. It was about time, right? I feel so liberated. It was like watching someone celebrate their own ruin without knowing it. And I continued my normal routine. I went to the office, worked on the new contracts, coordinated with the teams, expanded operations. At night, I'd come home and pretend to be the same defeated man she thought I was. But inside, something had fundamentally changed. Her words no longer hurt me. Her contempt no longer affected me, because I knew something she didn't. I knew that with each passing day, the gap between her perception and reality was growing wider, and that when that gap finally closed, the impact would be devastating. Enrique called me almost daily. Any news? She's still acting like this is the best thing that's ever happened to her, I replied one afternoon. Perfect, let her. When she falls, she'll fall harder. And then that night came, the dinner with friends. Melissa had been planning it for weeks. She wanted to make it public. She wanted to announce the divorce as if it were an achievement, as if leaving me were a badge of honor. I knew what was going to happen. Enrique had warned me she'd probably use the occasion to humiliate me one last time, to make sure everyone knew she was the one leaving me, not the other way around. Are you going to go? He had asked me. Of course, I replied. I wouldn't miss this for the world. That afternoon, I got ready calmly, showered, shaved, chose simple but presentable clothes, and as I dressed, I thought about all the moments that had led me here, all the humiliations, all the times I stayed silent when I should have spoken, all the times I accepted being less than I was because someone else needed to believe I was inferior. And I thought about how different it would be when I walked out of that restaurant. I arrived late on purpose, 20 minutes, enough for Melissa to be relaxed, confident, her guard down, enough for her to have started her show. When I entered the restaurant and saw them from a distance, they looked like a postcard of happiness, loud laughter, raised glasses, the table of successful friends celebrating life. I approached slowly, savoring the anticipation, and then I heard her. Her voice clear, strong, full of that contempt I knew so well. I'm going to divorce him. He's too much of a failure for me. The words I had been waiting for, the words that confirmed everything Enrique and I had planned, the words that would seal her fate. And as she kept talking, laughing at me, with people who were supposedly my friends, I felt something strange. It wasn't anger, it wasn't pain, it was peace. A deep peace that came from knowing I didn't have to pretend anymore, that I no longer had to be the submissive husband, the silent provider, the man who swallowed humiliations with a smile. I took off my wedding ring as I walked towards the table, the ring I had worn for 23 years, the symbol of a marriage that never really existed. And when I dropped it on the table, when I saw the fear in Melissa's eyes, I knew the moment of truth had arrived. What followed was better than I could have imagined. Watching her face change from arrogance to confusion, from confusion to panic, from panic to absolute terror. Watching how her friends, the same ones who were laughing at me seconds before, suddenly didn't know where to look. Watching how the power shifted hands in a matter of minutes. I told her everything, the contracts, the money, the $5 million the company was now worth. And with every word, with every revelation, I watched her world collapse. I watched as she understood the magnitude of what she had lost. Not because of bad luck, not because of external circumstances, but because of her own arrogance, her own cruelty for underestimating the man she had married. Camillo, the one who had laughed the hardest at Melissa's taunts, was now pale as a ghost. Karina, who always backed every cruel comment, stared at her glass as if she wanted to disappear inside it. And Melissa was just trembling. Crying wouldn't bring anything back. Pleading wouldn't change the signed documents. And getting angry would only confirm that everything I had said about her was true. I left the restaurant with a lightness I hadn't felt in decades. The cold night air hit my face, and I inhaled it deeply. Freedom. That's what it felt like, pure, undeniable freedom. I drove to that small hotel and spent the night processing everything. I didn't sleep much, not because of anxiety or remorse, but because my mind was too awake, too aware that I had crossed a point of no return. In the morning, my phone was still vibrating with messages from Melissa. But now there were others too. From Camillo, "Bro, I didn't know things were so bad. We should talk." From Karina, "Evaristo, please don't make any hasty decisions." Melissa was under a lot of stress. Messages from people who had no problem laughing at me when I was a failure. But now that I had money, now that I had power, they suddenly wanted to mediate, reconcile, smooth things over. I deleted all the messages without replying, except one from Enrique. "See you at 10. We have work to do." Enrique's office was in the city center, a modern building with huge windows overlooking the main street. I arrived 15 minutes early. He was already there with a pile of documents on his desk and 2 cups of steaming coffee. "How do you feel?" was the first thing he asked. "Strangely good," I admitted. "I thought I'd feel guilt or doubt or something, but I just feel relief." Enrique smiled. "That's because you finally stopped carrying someone else's weight. Now you're just carrying your own, and believe me, it's much lighter." He showed me the documents, divorce papers, bank accounts, properties, everything meticulously organized, all designed to protect what was mine and ensure Melissa received exactly what she was legally entitled to. Almost nothing. "She's going to fight," I warned. "She'll say I tricked her, that I manipulated her." "Let her try," Enrique replied calmly. "Every paper she signed has her authenticated signature. Every document is dated and timed. She voluntarily waived her rights when she believed they were worthless. The fact that they're now worth millions doesn't change the legality of her decision, and if she gets a good lawyer, she can get the best lawyer in the country. It doesn't matter, the facts are the facts. She made an informed decision, or at least she should have informed herself before signing. The law doesn't protect stupidity or arrogance." I signed the divorce papers. Each signature was like cutting a thread that had kept me tied for 23 years. When I finished, Enrique extended his hand. "Congratulations, Evaristo. You are officially a free man." The following weeks were a whirlwind. Melissa hired a lawyer, just as Enrique predicted, an aggressive man in an expensive suit with a shark smile. He threatened lawsuits, investigations, with making it public that I had deceived my wife. Enrique destroyed him in the first meeting. He presented every document, every signature, every date. He proved that everything had been legal, transparent, and completely voluntary on Melissa's part. The lawyer left that meeting visibly defeated. He told Melissa she had no case, that she could try anyway, but she would only spend money she no longer had on a battle she couldn't win. She didn't accept it easily. She tried to contact me directly, desperate messages, late-night calls. She even showed up at my office one afternoon. My secretary stopped her at the reception. Mr. Evaristo is not available for unscheduled visits. I'm his wife, Melissa shouted. Not anymore, my secretary replied with a professional smile. The divorce papers were filed a week ago. If you need to communicate with him, do so through his lawyer. Seeing Melissa being escorted out of my building should have given me satisfaction, and in part it did. But more than anything, I felt pity, not for her, but for all the time I had wasted trying to earn the love of someone incapable of loving anyone but herself. That night, I had dinner with my mother. Dolores had aged since her illness, but her mind was still sharp. "How do you feel, son?" she asked as we shared a simple meal in her small house. "Free," I answered honestly, and scared because I don't know what to do with this freedom. She took my hand in hers, wrinkled but warm. "You live, Evaristo. That's what you do. You live the life you always deserved but never allowed yourself to have." The news of the divorce spread quickly. In social circles where I barely existed as a shadow behind Melissa. Suddenly, my name was in every conversation. Not because I sought attention, but because the truth was too juicy to keep secret. Camillo, Melissa's best friend and her most enthusiastic accomplice in humiliating me, was the first to try to reach out. He found me one afternoon in a cafe near my office. He sat down in front of me without asking permission. "Evaristo, we need to talk," he said with a forced seriousness I didn't recognize in him. I looked at him over my coffee cup. "We have nothing to talk about, Camillo. Look, I know things got out of hand that night. Melissa was going through a tough time. We shouldn't have laughed. It was immature. Immature." I repeated the word, letting it hang between us. "Camillo, you guys spent years laughing at me. Every social gathering was an opportunity to remind me how little I was worth, and you were the one who had the most fun." He looked down. "I was just going with the flow. Melissa is very persuasive. You know that. Melissa is cruel and you are weak. That's the truth." He tensed up. "I didn't come here for you to insult me. Then why did you come? To apologize? To feel better about yourself? Or maybe to see if you can still get something out of our friendship now that it turns out I have money?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Camillo opened his mouth, closed it, and finally stood up. "You're a resentful person, Evaristo. You always were. And you're a parasite. You always were." I watched him walk away quickly, probably to report back to Melissa on how he had found me. Different, harder, no longer the docile man who allowed himself to be stepped on. And I realized something important. I didn't miss any of them. Not their fake laughs, not their superficial conversations, not the constant feeling of being judged and found wanting. Karina was next, but she was more calculated. She didn't come to my office. She didn't ambush me in a cafe. She sent me a message. "Evaristo, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but could we talk in private? There are things you should know about Melissa." That caught my attention, not because I was curious about Melissa, but because I was intrigued by what game Karina was playing now. I agreed to meet her at a different restaurant on the other side of town. She arrived 20 minutes late in a dark green dress and sunglasses she didn't take off until she sat down. "Thanks for coming," she began in a soft, almost vulnerable voice. "I wasn't sure you would. I have 10 minutes, Karina. Say what you have to say." She took a breath. "Melissa hates me now. She says you all betrayed her, that I should have warned her about you." "Warned her about me?" I couldn't help but smile at the irony. "Warned her about what exactly?" "She thinks you planned everything from the beginning, that you manipulated her into signing those papers, that you always knew the company would recover, and you set a trap for her." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "And what do you think?" Karina looked down. "I think she brought it on herself. I think she treated you horribly for years, and no one had the courage to tell her to stop. Myself included." "Why?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Why did none of you say anything?" "Because Melissa was the center. She organized everything. She connected people. If you went against her, you were out. And nobody wanted to be out. It was easier to laugh with me than to defend what was right." She nodded slowly. "I'm sorry. I know it doesn't mean anything now, but I'm sorry." "You're right. It doesn't mean anything." She flinched as if I'd hit her. "She's destroyed Evaristo. She doesn't sleep. She doesn't eat. She only talks about how to get something back, anything. That's not my problem, Karina. I know, but I thought you want to know. Why? So I'd feel sorry for her. So I'd reconsider. So I'd give her some money out of pity. Karina didn't answer, which was answer enough. Melissa had years to treat me with decency, years to see me as a human being instead of a checkbook, and she chose not to over and over again. Now she has to live with the consequences of her choices. What if she does something drastic? Karina asked in a low voice. What if she hurts herself? I looked at her steadily. Then that will be her decision, like everything else she's done. I'm not responsible for Melissa's actions. I never was, even though she spent years making me believe otherwise. Karina stood up. You're colder than I thought. I'm not cold. I'm just tired. Tired of carrying someone else's guilt. Tired of being the villain in someone else's story. Tired of putting everyone's needs above my own. She nodded and left without another word. And I stayed there finishing my coffee, realizing that every confrontation, every attempt to make me feel guilty, only reinforced that I had made the right decision. The months passed. The divorce was finalized without further drama. Melissa signed the final papers with red eyes, but without a word. Enrique informed me that she had gotten a job in a boutique. She earned enough for a small apartment and basic expenses. A completely different life from the one she had lived with me. Do you think she'll learn anything from this? I asked Enrique one afternoon as we reviewed the last legal documents. He shrugged. Some people learn, others just become more bitter. Melissa will probably blame everyone but herself for the rest of her life. And he was right. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Melissa told a very different version of the story. In her version, I was a calculating manipulator who had planned to destroy her from the beginning, who had hidden information, who had conspired with my lawyer to leave her on the street. She was the victim, the deceived woman, the betrayed wife. At first, it bothered me that people could believe her lies, but then I realized something liberating. It didn't matter. The people who really knew me knew the truth, and the people who preferred to believe Melissa's version were probably never my friends anyway. I started to rebuild my social life from scratch, not with important or influential people, but with people I knew from work, engineers, technicians, people who valued honesty and hard work over status and appearances. I discovered there was a whole world of genuine relationships I had missed because I was too busy trying to fit into Melissa's social circle. I met a group that met on Saturdays to play chess in a park. Men my age, some older, some younger. We talked about politics, business, life, and no one judged me for the car I drove or the clothes I wore. One afternoon, while playing a particularly intense game with a man named Eliseo, a retired math professor, he told me something that stuck with me. You know, Evaristo, there are two types of people in this world. Those who build and those who consume. You're a builder, and consumers will always try to feed off you. The trick is to recognize them in time. And if you don't recognize them in time, I asked, then you learn an expensive lesson, he replied, moving his bishop. But at least you learn. I lost that game, but I gained something more valuable, the confirmation that I wasn't alone, that there were other men who had been through similar situations, who had been used, discarded, humiliated, and who had survived and thrived. My company continued to grow, contracts multiplied. I had to hire more staff, expand facilities, invest in new technology. And every achievement, every success was mine. I didn't have to share it with someone who minimized it. I didn't have to justify why I was proud. I didn't have to apologize for being good at what I did. One night, reviewing numbers in my office, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated to answer, but something made me do it. Evaristo. The voice was Melissa's, but it sounded different, smaller, more fragile. What do you want, Melissa? I just wanted to know how you were. The silence stretched between us. How am I? I'm fine, very well. In fact, I'm glad, she said, though her voice suggested otherwise. I heard the company is doing very well. Yes, it's doing very well. Another silence. Evaristo. Do you ever wonder what things would have been like if I had been different? The question took me by surprise, not for its content, but because it implied a level of self-awareness I didn't think Melissa had. Sometimes, I admitted, but then I remember you can't build a life on hypotheses. You can only work with what's real. And the reality was that you didn't love me. Maybe you never did, and I spent too much time pretending that didn't matter. I did love you, she said weakly, in my own way. Your way of loving looked a lot like contempt, Melissa. I heard her shaky breath on the other end of the line. Could you ever forgive me? I've already forgiven you, I replied honestly, because holding a grudge only hurts me. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, and it definitely doesn't mean going back. I wasn't asking to go back, she said quickly. I don't know. I guess I needed to hear it. Now you've heard it. Take care, Melissa. I hung up before she could reply, and for the first time in all those months, I felt like I had finally closed that chapter. Not with revenge, not with hatred, but with the simple acceptance that some things just end, and it's okay to let them go. Life has a strange way of balancing itself. For years, I had been invisible, the man in the background, the one who paid the bills while others shone. And now, without seeking it, I found myself being noticed. The company appeared in specialized publications. I was invited to give lectures on business crisis management. Young entrepreneurs wanted to meet with me for advice. It was surreal. For decades, building in silence, and suddenly the world decided what I had to say was worth listening to. One morning, I received an invitation to speak at an industrial conference. The theme was business resilience. Normally, I would have refused. I didn't like public attention, but something in me had changed. I was no longer afraid to take up space. I no longer felt I had to make myself small for others to feel big. I accepted. The conference was in a luxury hotel in the city center. 200 people in the auditorium, entrepreneurs, executives, business students, all waiting to hear the story of the man who had brought his company to the brink of collapse and brought it back. I went on stage with my heart beating fast, not from nerves, but from the awareness that I was about to do something I had never allowed myself to do, speak my truth without apologies. My name is Evaristo, I began, my voice amplified by the microphones, and for a long time I believed I was worthless. The silence in the room was absolute. Not because my businesses failed, but because someone very close to me convinced me that I was a failure no matter what I achieved. I spoke for 40 minutes about the company, about the crisis, about the difficult decisions, but also about something deeper, about how emotional abuse doesn't always come with shouting or physical violence. Sometimes it comes with subtle comments, with laughter that cuts deeper than knives, with looks that tell you you'll never be enough. When I finished, the applause was deafening, but what impacted me most were the people who approached me afterwards. Men my age, some older, some younger, all with similar stories. My wife tells me I'm useless every time I lose a contract. My friends laugh at my work because it's not glamorous. I've spent 20 years feeling invisible in my own marriage. I listened to them all and told them what no one had told me when I needed it. Your worth doesn't depend on someone else's opinion, not even someone who sleeps next to you. A young man, he couldn't have been more than 35, stayed until the end. He waited for everyone else to leave. Mr. Evaristo, can I ask you a personal question? Go ahead. How did you know it was time to leave? How did you know there was nothing left to save? I sat on the edge of the stage, tired but satisfied. When you realize you're sacrificing your peace of mind just to keep the peace at home, there's nothing left to save, because it's not a home, it's a prison. The young man nodded slowly, with tears in his eyes. Thank you, he whispered. And he left. I don't know what decisions he made after that conversation, but I hope they were the right ones for him. The following months were a mix of intense work and personal discovery. I traveled more, not for business, but for pleasure. I visited cities I had always wanted to see, but that Melissa considered boring or unsophisticated. I walked through narrow streets in small towns. I ate at local restaurants, talked to strangers who became temporary friends, and in every place, in every conversation, I felt like I was recovering pieces of myself I had lost years ago. One afternoon, while walking through a craft market in a coastal city, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks, a small jewelry workshop, and on the counter, wedding rings. I approached without really thinking. The artisan, an older man with calloused hands and kind eyes, greeted me. Looking for something in particular? No. I answered honestly, just looking. He followed my gaze to the rings. Married, divorced. Ah, he nodded with understanding. Recent. Enough. He took one of the rings, a simple one, without adornments. You know what's interesting about wedding rings? They're circles with no beginning and no end. But sometimes the circle needs to be broken for something new to begin. Are you a philosopher or a jeweler? I asked with a smile. I'm an old man who has seen many marriages, the good and the bad. And I'll tell you something, the worst ones are not the ones that end. They're the ones that continue when they should have ended. His words resonated with me for days, because he was right. The worst part of my marriage with Melissa was not the end. It was all those years in between when I knew something was wrong, but I didn't have the courage to do anything about it. When I chose the comfort of the familiar over the uncertainty of the unknown, when I preferred to be miserable with someone than risk being alone. Back home, life began to settle into a new normal, a normal that I designed. I ate when I was hungry, not when someone else decided it was time for dinner. I watched the movies I wanted to watch. I listened to the music I liked, small things, trivial for some, but deeply significant for someone who had spent decades subordinating their preferences to someone else's. My mother noticed the change. One afternoon, while we were having tea in her small garden, she told me, "You look different, son, younger." I feel different, I admitted. I feel like I can finally breathe fully. She took my hand. You always knew Melissa wasn't right for you, but sometimes we need to hit bottom to finally decide to climb up. Did you hit bottom with Dad? I asked, referring to the man who had abandoned us when I was a child. More than once, she replied sadly. But unlike you, I stayed too long. I waited until he decided to leave. You, on the other hand, took control. And that, Evaristo, requires more courage than most people have. I didn't feel brave, I felt terrified. Courage is not the absence of fear, it's acting in spite of it. We sat in silence, enjoying the afternoon sun, and I realized that I had spent so much time seeking approval from people who didn't value me, that I had ignored the one person who had always been there, my mother who had raised me alone, who had worked to exhaustion to give me opportunities, who had never made me feel less than I was. Mom, I'm sorry, I said suddenly. She looked at me with confusion. What? For not listening to you when you warned me about Melissa, for wasting so many years, for not visiting you more often because she always found excuses. Dolores shook her head. Don't apologize for learning, son. The most valuable lessons are the ones we pay for with our own pain. The important thing is not how long it took you to learn. It's that you finally did. At the office, things kept improving. We had closed 2 more contracts, one with a European company, another with a manufacturing chain in South America. The company Melissa had wanted to liquidate now employed 70 people, 70 families who depended on decisions I made. It was a huge responsibility, but it was also deeply satisfying. One day, my assistant informed me that there was a woman at the reception who insisted on seeing me. Named Claudia. She says she's an old acquaintance of yours. Claudia. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. I went down to the reception out of curiosity, and there she was. A woman about my age with short silver hair and a warm smile. It took me a moment to recognize her. Claudia. We had studied together. We had been close friends in college. Then life took us on different paths, and we lost touch. Evaristo, she said with genuine emotion. I can't believe it's you. I hugged her, surprised by how happy I was to see her. Claudia, it's been how many years? Too many, she replied. I saw your conference online, the one on business resilience, and I thought, that's my friend Evaristo, the quiet guy who always had the best ideas but never dared to share them. I'm not that guy anymore, I said. I can see that. Do you have time for coffee? We went to a coffee shop near the office, and for 2 hours we talked. She told me about her life, her career as an architect, her divorce 5 years ago, her 2 grown children. And I told her about Melissa, about the company, about everything that had happened. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she simply said, I'm glad you got out of that. The Evaristo I knew deserved much more than to be the floor someone else wiped their shoes on. Claudia and I started seeing each other regularly. It wasn't romance, at least not at first. It was something simpler and deeper, genuine friendship. She understood what it was like to rebuild yourself after someone made you feel invisible. She told me about her ex-husband, a man who had controlled her for years, telling her that her ideas were silly, that her work wasn't important, that she should be grateful that someone put up with her. I spent 15 years believing him, she told me one afternoon as we walked through the park. 15 years thinking the problem was me, that if I were just more understanding, more patient, more of what he needed, then he would finally love me for real. And what made you wake up? I asked. My daughter one day saw me cry after an argument with her father and asked me, "Mom, why do you stay with someone who makes you cry more than he makes you laugh?" And I had no answer, because she was right. It was strange to find someone who understood so perfectly. I didn't need to explain why I put up with so much. I didn't need to justify my decisions. She just knew, and there was something incredibly liberating in that. Over time, our friendship began to evolve. It wasn't dramatic. There wasn't a specific moment where everything changed. It was gradual. A hand that held mine a little longer than necessary. A look that lasted an extra second. Conversations that stretched late into the night because neither of us wanted them to end. One night, after dinner at a small Italian restaurant, she walked me to my car. The city shone with night lights. The air was cool but not cold. "Evaristo," she said, stopping under a streetlight. "I have to tell you something." My heart started a race. "I'm listening." I know we're both in a strange place, coming out of relationships that hurt us, rebuilding ourselves. And maybe it's too soon, maybe it's not even a good idea, but I really like you and I don't want to pretend I don't. The honesty in her words completely disarmed me. "Claudia, I started without knowing how to continue." "You don't have to say anything now," she interrupted gently. "I just wanted you to know. No pressure, no expectations, just the truth." I looked at her. Her eyes were clear, with no hidden agenda, no manipulation. Just a woman being vulnerable, being brave, being real. "I like you too," I finally admitted. "But you're right, I'm scared because the last time I trusted someone, they destroyed me, and I don't know if I'm ready to risk it again." She nodded with understanding. "Then let's go slow. No labels, no pressure, just two people enjoying each other's company. Does that sound good?" It sounds perfect. And so began something new, something that was nothing like what I had with Melissa. There were no games, no constant tests of my worth, no feeling of walking on broken glass, waiting to say the wrong thing. With Claudia, I could just be myself, the quiet man who preferred to stay home with a good book rather than go to parties. The man who got excited talking about industrial components, even knowing it was boring to most. The man who sometimes needed to be alone, not because he was angry, but because that's how he recharged. And she not only accepted it, she valued it. "I love that you're so different from me," she told me once. "I'm loud, social, spontaneous. You're calm, thoughtful, methodical. I don't need you to be like me. I like you exactly as you are." Words so simple, but they meant everything to someone who had spent decades being criticized for not being different. The months passed, the company continued to grow, but now success felt different. It was no longer something I needed to prove my worth. It was simply the natural result of doing well what I love to do. I hired Enrique as a permanent legal advisor. His wisdom had been invaluable during the divorce, and his friendship was something I didn't want to lose. One afternoon, while we were reviewing contracts in my office, he asked, "Have you heard anything from Melissa?" "Not directly," I replied, "but I hear things from time to time. And nothing. She's no longer part of my life. What she does or doesn't do doesn't affect me." Enrique smiled. "That's maturity, my friend. Many people say they've moved on, but they're still obsessed with their exes. You really let go." It took me a while, I admitted. There were nights when I wanted to know if she was suffering, if she regretted it, if she finally understood what she had lost. But then I realized those questions came from a wounded ego, not genuine curiosity, and that keeping her in my mind, even negatively, gave her a power over me she no longer deserved to have. "Wise," Enrique commented. "Very wise. However, the universe has strange ways of closing circles." 6 months after our last conversation, Melissa reappeared, not in person, but through an intermediary. A young woman showed up in my office. She was a lawyer and brought a letter from Melissa. My client would like to meet with you, she explained professionally, to discuss possible settlements. What kind of settlements? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She believes she's entitled to compensation for the years she was married to you, for her contribution to the home and her support during the difficult years. I almost laughed. Her contribution was to constantly humiliate me. Her support was to tell me I was a failure. That deserves compensation. The lawyer remained neutral. Mr. Evaristo, my job is to represent my client's interests. If you prefer not to meet with her, I can inform her. Tell her there's nothing to discuss. The documents she signed are legal and final. If she wants to fight, let her do it in court, but I warn you, she'll only lose money and time. The lawyer nodded and left. I expected to feel satisfaction, but I only felt tired. Tired that Melissa still believed she had some right to me or to what I had built. I told Claudia that night over dinner. She listened attentively and then said something that surprised me. You know what's saddest about all this? That she'll probably never understand that the problem wasn't that she lost the money. It was that she lost someone who really loved her. And money can be recovered, but that kind of love, once it's gone, rarely comes back. She was right. For years I had loved Melissa. Not perfectly, but sincerely, and she had wasted it, trampled on it, treated it as something worthless until it finally dried up. And now, when there was nothing left to rescue, she wanted to claim what she had never valued in the first place. Do you ever regret it? Claudia asked me. Regret what? How things ended. The way you revealed everything that night at the restaurant. I thought about her question carefully. Sometimes I wonder if I could have been more compassionate, less theatrical, but then I remember all the years of humiliation, all the times I was made to feel small in front of other people, and I realize I don't regret it, because that night, for the first time in decades, I wasn't the silent victim. I was someone who stood up for myself, and that had to happen. Claudia took my hand across the table. I'm not judging you. I just wanted to know how you processed it. And you? I asked, do you regret how your marriage ended? She shook her head. I regret not ending it sooner. I regret the years I lost trying to be enough for someone who would never see me as enough, but the end itself was necessary. We were two broken people who had somehow found a way to be whole together, not because one completed the other, but because we had both already completed ourselves. And that difference changed everything. Melissa's lawsuit eventually arrived as I expected. Enrique dismantled it in 2 weeks. The judges reviewed all the documents. They confirmed that everything had been legal, that Melissa had signed voluntarily, that there was no evidence of coercion or deceit. The case was dismissed, and with that, the last thread connecting me to Melissa was finally cut. That night, Claudia and I celebrated with a simple dinner in my apartment. Nothing elaborate, homemade pasta and red wine. How do you feel? She asked as we toasted. Free, I replied, completely free. And now what? Now I live without looking back, without carrying the past, just forward. She smiled. I like that plan. There's something else, I said, getting a little nervous. I want you to know that this us is important to me. I don't know exactly what it is yet, but I know I don't want to lose it. Claudia got up, walked around the table, and hugged me. You're not going to lose it, because I don't want to lose it either. And this time we both know enough not to ruin a good thing. We stood like that, hugging in silence, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt completely at peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was finally where I was supposed to be, with someone who saw me, who valued me, who respected me, and that, after everything I had been through, was more valuable than any amount of money. A year after that night in the restaurant, my life was unrecognizable. The company had reached valuations I never imagined. $10 million, 100 employees, contracts on 3 continents. But the most important thing wasn't the numbers. It was how I felt waking up every morning without dread, without anxiety, without that constant feeling of not being enough. Claudia had become a fundamental part of my life. We didn't live together. We both valued our personal space too much after our failed marriages, but we spent most of our free time together, and every day with her taught me something new about what a healthy relationship meant: communication, mutual respect, unconditional support, things that should be basic, but for me were revelations. One afternoon, while checking my mail, I found something unexpected: an invitation to an art exhibition. The artist's name stopped me: Melissa Contreras. Claudia was with me when I opened it. "Are you going to go?" she asked without judgment in her voice. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me is curious. Another part thinks it's better to leave the past where it is. What does the bigger part say? I thought about it. The bigger part says I have nothing left to prove, not to her, not to myself. That if I go, it would be out of genuine curiosity, not need. "Then maybe you should go." I looked at her, surprised. "It wouldn't bother you." "Why would it bother me? Melissa was part of your life for over 2 decades. It's natural to be curious about how she is. As long as you're not going looking to rekindle something, I don't see the problem." That was the difference. Melissa would have made a drama. She would have questioned my motives. She would have turned my curiosity into an accusation. Claudia simply trusted, because we had built something based on honesty, not control. I decided to go. Not to the opening, that would be too much. But on a quiet afternoon, days after the exhibition opened, the gallery was small but elegant. The white walls made the paintings stand out, and the paintings were surprising. Melissa had always mentioned that she liked art, but she had never painted anything during our marriage. She said she didn't have time, that the work of managing our social life was an art in itself. But here were dozens of canvases, some abstract, others more figurative, and they all had something in common: pain. You could see in every brushstroke, in every choice of color, in every composition. There was one in particular that stopped me. It was a man sitting in a chair looking out a window. His face was blank, featureless, but his posture conveyed defeat. The title: What I Didn't See. It's powerful, isn't it? A voice behind me. I turned. It was Melissa. She looked different, thinner, less makeup, simple clothes, but what was most different were her eyes. They no longer had that hardness I remembered. "Hello, Melissa," I said calmly. "I didn't expect to see you here," she replied. And for the first time in all the years I'd known her, she seemed genuinely vulnerable. I saw the invitation. I was curious. She nodded, looking at the painting beside me. "That one's about you," in case it wasn't obvious. I figured. We stood in silence for a moment. Then she spoke in a low voice. "I've had a lot of time to think, Evaristo, about us, about how I treated you, about the things I said. And I finally understand that the failure was never you, it was me. I failed as a wife, as a partner, as a basically decent human being." I didn't answer. I let the words float between us. "I don't expect forgiveness," she continued. "I don't deserve it, but I needed you to know that I get it now, that when I lost everything, when I had to rebuild my life from scratch, I finally saw what I had and what I had destroyed." I looked at her, really for the first time in years, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with genuine curiosity. "What changed?" I asked. "What made you see things differently?" She let out a bitter laugh. "Besides losing everything, I had to get a job. For real, for the first time in my life, depend on myself. And I met a woman at the boutique where I work, an older woman who constantly reminded me that I was slow, that I didn't understand anything, that I was useless. And one day, while she was yelling at me in front of other employees, I saw myself. I saw how I had treated you for years, and I felt sickened." "Are you still working there?" "No, I quit. I got another job in an art gallery. The owner saw some sketches I was doing on my breaks. He encouraged me to paint for real. This," she gestured around the room, "is the result of a year of therapy, a lot of introspection, and trying to transform my pain into something useful." "I'm happy for you," I said. And I meant it, really. Her voice held genuine surprise. "Really? Because resentment only hurts me. And I've already spent enough time being hurt because of you. Seeing you find your way, even if it was after we ended, is a good thing." Her eyes filled with tears. "I heard you were someone, Claudia, right?" "Yes. Is she good to you?" The question took me by surprise. "She's wonderful to me. She treats me like I deserve to be treated." Melissa nodded, wiping away tears. "Good, that's good. You deserve it, Evaristo. You always deserved it. I was just too broken to give it to you. We're all broken in some way, I replied. The difference is what we do with those cracks. Whether we use them as an excuse to hurt others or if we transform them into something better. She smiled faintly. When did you get so wise? When I finally had the space to think without someone telling me I was wrong. We walked slowly through the gallery. She explained some of the paintings to me, the emotions behind each one, the process of taking out all the pain and turning it into art. And I realized something. Melissa was finally doing the work she should have done years ago, facing her demons, taking responsibility, growing. You know what I regret the most? She asked when we reached the last painting. What? That I had to lose you to find myself, that I couldn't do this work when it still mattered, when we still had a chance. Maybe you weren't ready, I said softly. Maybe you needed to lose everything to value something. That doesn't make it hurt any less. No, but pain is part of growth, and it seems like you're growing. We said goodbye at the gallery entrance without hugs, without promises to keep in touch, just a silent acknowledgement that we had both moved on and that it was okay. I told Claudia everything that night. She listened without interrupting. How do you feel? She asked when I finished. At peace, I replied, truly at peace. Because I saw that Melissa is on her own path, and I'm on mine, and those paths no longer cross, and that's perfectly fine. Was there any moment where you wanted to go back? No, not for a second, because what you and I have is something I never had with her, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. Claudia kissed me softly. I love you. You know that. It was the first time she'd said it, and the words filled me with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. I love you too. The following months were the best of my life. The company continued to grow, but it was no longer my only source of identity. I had Claudia, I had real friends, I had a renewed relationship with my mother, I had hobbies, I had a full, balanced, satisfying life. One afternoon, while playing chess with Eliseo in the park, he asked me, you know the difference between a wise man and an intelligent man? What's that? The intelligent man learns from his mistakes. The wise man learns from the mistakes of others. But you know what's even better? What? The man who learns from his mistakes and then shares them so others don't have to go through the same thing. His words stuck with me and gave me an idea. I started writing, not a book, I didn't pretend to be a writer, but articles, blogs, posts on social media, sharing my experience, not with my full name, but semi-anonymously. I wrote about the signs of emotional abuse, about how to recognize them, about how to find the courage to leave, about how to rebuild afterwards. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of messages, thousands of people sharing their own stories, men and women who had been through similar situations, who felt trapped, who didn't know if what they were experiencing was normal. And my words, my story, gave them permission to believe they deserved better. You're making a difference, Claudia told me one night as we read some of the messages together. You think so? I know so. Look at this, she pointed to a message. This man says your story gave him the courage to leave a 30-year marriage. 30 years, Evaristo. You saved him decades of unhappiness. She was right, and I realized that everything that had happened, all the pain, all the humiliation, all the struggle had served a purpose greater than myself. It had served to help others. 2 years after that night in the restaurant, I was standing in front of a mirror adjusting my tie. It was an important event, a business gala where I would receive an award for sustainable business growth. Claudia was by my side, beautiful in a wine-colored dress, fixing my tie because I never did it right. Nervous? She asked. A little, I admitted, but also excited and grateful. Grateful for everything, for the pain that taught me my worth, for the fall that forced me to get up stronger, for finding you, for this second chance at life. She kissed me softly. It's not a second chance, love. It's your first real chance. Everything before was just preparation. She was right. My life with Melissa hadn't been living. It had been surviving. What I had now, this was living. At the gala, when I went on stage to receive the award, I looked at the audience. Hundreds of people, entrepreneurs, dreamers. And among them, in the front row, was Claudia, smiling at me with genuine pride. Beside her, my mother, with tears in her eyes, and behind them, Enrique raising his glass in a silent toast. These were my people, those who had supported me, who had seen me in my worst and had chosen to stay, those who celebrated my successes without resentment. When I lost everything, I began my speech. I thought my life was over, but it turns out that only a version of my life that should never have existed was ending, and that made space for something much better. So to everyone who is going through their own hell right now, I want to say this. Pain is temporary, growth is permanent, and you are much stronger than you think. The applause was deafening, and as I walked off the stage, with the award in my hands, I realized something profound. I hadn't won because I destroyed Melissa. I had won because I finally chose myself, and that, after all, was the only victory that truly mattered.